Good morning, everyone. It's Monday morning, and this is the time that I like to share with you the fact that the work that we're doing here to spread the teachings of Master as Swamiji expressed them is supported by your enthusiasm for it. I started these broadcasts when the pandemic first came into California, March of whatever year that was, 20. I thought it was an emergency project, but having been pretty much isolated in this house for a long time, not by any means sequestered now, but I've just taken up this huge broadcast ministry, and it's required technical help that I didn't have access to, except that your support has made it possible for me to have a very competent engineer who helps me every time. I've expanded now into recording audiobooks, and those audiobooks will have to be edited. Those are books of Swami Kriyananda's that he himself did not get to record. Both my voice and the voice of others. We've been doing translation into Italian and Spanish, and those the Italian book now has to be printed. The Spanish book is still sort of in process. And all of that has been made possible because of you. Support through Patreon on a regular basis or by going to my website, which is Asha Joy, clicking the donate button, and it comes into our mission of the Master's account, which is all you're doing. And also your continuing subscriptions to YouTube help give us more prominence. I'm actually quite impressed how often, of course, I'm in the flow, but how many views those accumulated talks are getting. Literally thousands and thousands of people all over the world. When we look at the analysis of what countries, it's distributed over several dozen countries. It's very gratifying, and it's all due to your enthusiasm. So keep it up, friends. If you keep doing your part, I can keep doing mine, and together we can do some good work for God and Guru. So thank you. Let's pray together. Excuse me. I have this thought that I don't like to say thank you because that implies that you are doing me a favor. And of course, I thank you in the sense that it's very gratifying to me to know that the work I'm doing is important also to you. And I get, of course, many wonderful comments and sufficient critical comments to keep a person level-headed. But it's more like, isn't it wonderful that we get to do this together? And so I do thank you. I thank you for the joy of working together and for the honor of serving this work. I think I'm just thanking God on all our behalf for the privilege of such a life. So let's now pray. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dear friend Swami Kriyananda, please enlighten us with the wisdom that inspired you to write these words. Help us to move beyond mere intellectual content to an intuitive perception of the vibration behind this. Because then these truths will not be something that we have learned, but something that we have become. And in this subject especially, where we are trying to inspire and guide others, we ourselves must embody the ideals we hope to awaken in others. Guide us and bless us, that we may be transformed in thy light of wisdom. Om. Peace. Amen. Okay, my friends, we're going to continue on the subject of feelings, which is an incredibly important subject for people in positions of leadership, for all human beings, actually, but for leadership especially, as you'll see in what Swami writes here. There is also another and deeper reason for keeping oneself open to the feelings of others. The leader who, in his determination to exclude his personal feelings from every reckoning, refuses to consider any feelings at all, the leader who, in his determination to exclude his personal feelings from every reckoning, refuses to consider any feelings at all, is likely himself to become a mere robot. Leadership without feeling is, in fact, an ideal that we find held up to the modern public in countless novels and movies. It must, one supposes, be some people's ideal of leaderly perfection. You know, you think about, well, I just saw an advertisement for a James Bond movie. And, you know, that's how he was, you know, completely unshaken. He gets thrown out of an airplane and the parachute doesn't go with him. But at the last second, he finds a way. He grabs onto someone else who's parachuting out, you know, and does the whole thing and then lands and then just straightens his suit cuffs. You know, it's like we're supposed to not have any response, or the orders the execution and then continues with his lunge without even thinking about it. As the Swami says, these images would not appear so regularly if there wasn't some collective, somewhere in the collective psyche, some thought that this is really the way to be. Think of all the steely-eyed sheriffs of Western romance, of the many square-jawed tycoons of industry, of the endless series of stern-visaged generals staring with pointed chins into the distance. You can see it all, can't you? And he's right. It's like, how did this become the ideal? Why wasn't the ideal the one who, you know, holds his child on his knee while he's talking to you? A friend of mine, just thinking of that. A friend of mine who was a unity minister, was or is, I don't know, this is many years ago. His second or third child had some strange genetic anomaly and never learned to speak and didn't grow up. The child died when she was about 6 or 8, maybe, and never developed normally during that time. But she had a lovely visage and had a really pronounced, uplifting vibration to her. The man was a devotee of another spiritual path, and that spiritual teacher actually said that she was a very high soul who was just paying off a certain karma by living this way. And because she was silent and also very placid, and did not have the capacity to be on her own in any way, my friend, who was a minister, often did his ministerial counseling and his meetings and so on with the child on his lap. But they knew that this child was not going to live anything remotely resembling a full term, and the father's heart wanted to keep her close while he could. And he told me, he said, having that child sitting on my lap when people were talking to me about their personal difficulties had a very interesting effect. Whatever they thought was such a drama in their life often didn't appear quite so serious when I'm holding my, you know, my impaired baby who's not going to live to the age of 8. And but just the sweetness of that, why would that not be our ideal of leadership? You see, it's a very good question to ask. Why would a man not be a man, for example, who has a very loving relationship and supportive, respectful relationship with his wife? Why would that not be the ideal of leadership? Why does it have to be this strong, unfeeling, untouched? I mean, when you actually analyze it, it's ridiculous. Because nobody is really happy in that context. Those are the kind of parents or spouses that drive people to suicide. I mean, it's not like, that's not what anyone wants. People spend millions of dollars on therapy when they have to be in close association with such people. But in our fictional accounts, we hold them up as ideals. I mean, this is extremely important because our society is completely crazy. And I don't just mean, I just mean what I said. It's completely crazy. Pretty much the values of mainstream popular society are quite skewed. Now, there's a huge, vast population, a far greater population of warm-hearted, lovely, loving people. But our popular media glorifies a lot of realities that we all know are not really who we want to be. But we sort of absorb this through our skin. And then we have these ideas that are not carefully examined. And one of the things that's really required to be successful on the spiritual path is that we put out the energy to actually look past the facade and ask the question, what is really true? And even, why do I believe this? I watched this experience once, and this is a lot how it happens. I for a very brief period of time, I was playing racquetball with some friends. This was when I still lived in Ananda Village. And we would go into the town to the local sports club where they had a court, and we would play racquetball. And then afterwards there was a hot tub, and the hot tub was, I think there was just one, so men and women were together. You wore bathing suits, and everybody was just in one place. So sometimes when we were sitting in there would be other people from the town, and you're sitting in a hot tub together. You usually talk about the hot tub or something like that. There's not much else to talk about. You may have nothing in common. And there was this woman in there, and her child was about 8 years old, I think. She looked about that old, and she was there with her mother in the hot tub. So we're talking about the hot tub, and the woman says, in a voice that I remember was just like this, I don't really like hot tubs. I prefer the dry heat of a sauna. That's what she said, like that. She must have been from the East Coast, because that's what she sounded like, at least. And her little daughter, who looked a lot like her and had the same vibration as her mother, looked up at her mother and said to us, I prefer the dry heat of a sauna too, like that. I'm not even sure she knew what the dry heat of a sauna was, but that's what Mommy says, that's what I say. And I just had this picture, partly because of the character of the mother that was being revealed and everything. I had this picture of this little girl. She's 13, and her friends say, oh, my friend has a jacuzzi. Let's go sit in the jacuzzi. She says, I prefer the dry heat of a sauna, like that. So she doesn't go. She gets a boyfriend. The boyfriend, wants to go to a hot tub place. No, I prefer the dry heat of a sauna. You never think of what's important to me. Then it escalates. She gets married. He wants to put a hot tub in the backyard. Oh, it's just like, and where did it start? It started because her mother said it, and she never thought it through after that. And that's how most people live. I'm not being rude. Swami used to say these things to me when I was in my early 20s, and I thought he was being so cynical. I wish he had been. He wasn't being cynical. He was just being truthful. It takes a lot of effort to actually separate yourself from your conditioning and stand back and actually ask the question, what is true? And that's why very few people are on the spiritual path, because you have to turn your back on the tide and go the other way. If you're that kind of person, you can't imagine doing anything but that. But you have to be very creative, because you can't just take the word of whatever's going on. And just because thousands and millions of people endorse it doesn't make it any more true. It just means that thousands and millions of people endorse it. Or, let's phrase it another way, is it really your ideal? When you picture yourself at the end of your life, do you want to be recognized as the steely-eyed, unfeeling hero who never let anything get in the way of what? Is that, on our deathbed, is that really going to make us super happy? In our friendships, in our relationships, in our parenting? Is that what's going to really bring us what the heart is really longing for? So Swami points this out, the tycoon, the general, really, it might make good drama, but that doesn't mean it makes good life. So let's moving on. So think of the classic scene from what was probably every movie ever made during wartime in England. The office sends a young soldier, deeply in love and eager to live his life fully, out on a virtually hopeless mission. "That will be all, Jones," he says, dismissing him as he returns to his papers. He's talking to the general. Think of the classic, the officer, that's what it is. The officer sends a young soldier, deeply in love and eager to live his life fully, out on a virtually hopeless mission. So after the officer gives Jones his orders, Jones knows that he's probably going to die and nothing he hopes for is ever going to happen. The officer says, "That will be all, Jones," he says, dismissing him as he returns to his papers. Jones turns stiffly and strides to the door. His hand pauses on the doorknob. "Sir?" "Yes, Jones?" Another pause. "Nothing, sir." Lifting his chin a little, Joan closes the door behind him. I saw the opposite. I saw this. It's a movie it was a war movie that I'm so sorry I saw because the images of it just break my heart even now. I think it was about Gallipoli. I think that's what it was. It doesn't matter. But in that context, a large group of soldiers was forced to follow orders. The orders were suicidal and foolish. And the officer knew that he and all his men were going to be slaughtered, which in fact they were, to no purpose. Swami talks earlier, sometimes in war, sacrifices are necessary in order to make progress, but this was a complete waste of humanity. And the officer is the opposite. He's not cold-hearted. This is hard for me. He's not cold-hearted. He's very, very tender. And he's an older man because he's a career officer. And he has pictures of his wife, of his family, and he knows he's never going to see him again. And because he's in officers' quarters, he has certain luxuries that others don't have, which includes a record player, a portable. So he in the film, which is exquisitely done because I must have seen this 25 years ago, he looks at the picture of his wife, he folds it, he puts it away, turns on the record player, and he puts on some beautiful favorite piece of very, very moving classical music, beautiful piece. I don't know the name of it. And he just lies down on his bunk and he just listens to the music until it ends. And then the next morning he leads his men to death. Now, he had to do it. He was a career officer. This is war. Crazy, insane things happen. But there wasn't even the slightest pretense that every part of him was not engaged. And it was so much more compelling, than some false story of nobody has any feelings and nobody cares if they never see their wife again. Anyway, I never can recommend that movie to anyone, and I never want to see it again because it just broke my heart. It was the truth, but that's why I think we sometimes want these steely-eyed. We want to avoid suffering and find happiness, and so we imagine there's a way to avoid suffering. On Saturday, there was a program that was put on by the Sangha here, Beyond Mind, it's called. Now it's online as a full day of seminars, of talks. And Jyotish, who's the spiritual director of Ananda, opened the program, and he read something from Master. I don't have any idea where it was from, but Master actually said that the purpose of this world is to disillusion us. I was talking about what Swami said that seems so cynical to me. I used to resist the things that he would say because I wanted to hold on to my illusions. And he was past the need to do that. And when I spoke after Jyotish, I remarked about that because I'd never actually noticed that statement of Master's, or maybe never heard it. And disillusion is very scary for us because to be disillusioned will break our hearts. And nobody wants that. So we work so hard to avoid that happening because at a certain point we have to recognize that most of what we've been told in life is not true. We have to dissolve the illusion that money is the source of happiness, that hard-edged, unfeeling reality is really going to get us through, instead of just build up this wall that'll have to be cracked later. It takes a lot of courage to live by the truth, so we might as well be in the front of the line working on it, because sooner or later we're going to have to do it. Swami said to a group of us once, "You're going to get it right some incarnation or another." He said, sooner or later, so why waste a few million years with pursuing false images? So this is quite simply what Swami's trying to deal with. Sir Philip Sidney didn't ignore his soldier's feelings when he gave him his water flask. This is the reference to this famous scene, this famous true scene, where the officer was dying on the battlefield was desperately thirsty because he was bleeding, I guess. But he had one water flask, and there was a soldier dying next to him. He handed him the water flask and said, "Your need is greater than mine." It lives forever because it's such a extraordinary, moving example of selfless love. Sir Philip didn't ignore his soldier's feelings when he gave him his water flask. The genuine leader is a person of genuine feeling. It is his compassionate concern for those under him, far more than any tactical brilliance he may show in the field, that wins him their support. For his feelings are directed outwardly in giving to others, and never inwardly in taking for himself. Swami's referencing the fact that there are there are divine laws, there are cosmic laws that are simply true. And they're true because they're based on a broader picture of reality. And that broader picture of reality is, despite all appearances of our individual separateness, and despite the illusion that this world presents to us, that the more I grab for myself, the happier and stronger I will be, that's simply not true. It's when we transcend the limiting compulsions of this identification with our individuality. I mean, this doesn't even make sense to some people, but it does make sense to others of us. We've experienced it enough incarnations. We're just not wanting to waste another million years. And so we are a part of all that is. In our Festival of Light every week, Swami included that in several places. Let us celebrate our own greater reality. It's the dividing line between the people who can become interested in the spiritual life of self-realization and those who can't, is the understanding that my little individuality is integrally connected to a greater reality, and that my fulfillment does not come in constantly affirming the limited self, but it comes in realizing the greater self. That's what self-realization is. And these extraordinary souls, whether they be brave soldiers on the field, great artists or musicians, or above all, saints, people of deep spiritual realization, their characteristic feature is joy and an expansive self-offering. It's not that they have no feelings. I had to learn this slowly with Swami Kriyananda. He was deeply sensitive, but he followed what I was saying a couple of sessions ago. You become aware of your feelings. I think it was in this class. It might have been in the Gita seminar. You become fully aware of your feelings. And then you make a decision about how most beneficially to deal with those feelings. And it took me a number of years to understand this, because my way was to suppress my feelings, because I wasn't supposed to give first allegiance to how I felt, So I tried to do that by suppressing them, but that suppression doesn't work. And eventually it just caused an enormous amount of confusion and personality aberrations and all kinds of things that were not really good. Then I came to understand that you let them be, you know what they are. We spend a lot of incarnations developing them, and we can't just dismiss them. But then we decide what's dharma in relation to it. When that Sir Sidney was on the battlefield, he didn't say that he wasn't thirsty. He didn't say that everything in him didn't scream out to take that flask and drink it himself. But even in that moment, he was able also to look at his fellow man and say, well, he's also thirsty, let me give it to him. I mean, that's the greatness that just thrills and lives forever. The steely-eyed hero is amusing for a moment, but my God, you wouldn't even want to have him for dinner. I don't mean to eat him for dinner, but as dinner company. Because he would just be too unpleasant. He was just too unpleasant. So, to recapitulate this chapter, which is called Leadership Means Setting Aside Personal Desires, here are the 4 points Swami offered us. The true leader puts his personal wishes last, not first. They can be last, they can be in the equation, but everything else has to be considered before he says, I'm just going to do it because I want to. And second, a leader should ask himself in every circumstance, not what would I like, but rather, what do I feel is needed and what is right? And Swami put it in another place by saying, what is trying to happen here? How is all the energy gathering? What's going on now? And everybody's realities then are part of what's trying to happen. Who needs to learn? Who can learn? Who can take responsibility? How can everything be moved forward? Third, well, he says it right here, a good approach to every problem is to ask oneself, what is trying to happen here? One's skill as a leader is demonstrated by his ability to tune in impersonally to the flow of events. You know, there are many karmic forces that are determining how things are going to evolve. Our personal role in it is important to us because it's our karma to carry it out. And we may even have a very influential role. But still, we are a part of a greater reality. So where is that greater reality taking us? And number 4, leadership requires openness to the feelings of others and not insensitivity to them in the name of getting on with the job. To a major extent, their welfare is the job. Isn't that a wonderful way? And isn't it thrilling in any circumstance to work with someone who has responsibility for what you're doing, but exercises with that attitude? So let us become that kind of leader. God bless you.